Well, this evening, as we've said, this is part 7 in our series, and my plan is to devote a whole session, the next one, on the creation mandate. I think there's enough insight and information there, and very practical things that I think you'll find interesting. I don't know when it is on the schedule, but Jerry will let us know in the future. May even be next year, right, Jerry? Yeah. Anyway, this evening we want to look at day 6, and just by way of introduction, in our culture, you're probably aware of how much interest there is in the universe and how vast it is, and the distance of stars, and how insignificant, according to secular thought, the planet Earth is. And even small, our sun is an average size star. No spectacular issue with our star. And yet, biblically, if you look at the 6 days of creation, planet Earth is the focus of all 6 days. And the first 5 days and part of the 6th day, the focus is moving in a particular direction, such that ultimately we come to the creation of man. So the most important aspect of anything in all of the universe is God's creation of man. And that's what the first, actually part of the 6 days, so 6 days look forward to creation of man. So there's a lot of insight here, there's a lot of significance in this, so we want to not rush over it. So I'd like to take a look at that. And also, this is, according to Henry Morris, the most important book ever written, and I would agree with that. And in fact, next time that we have a session, one of the things I'm going to try and demonstrate from the creation mandate is that no matter what category you can think about, whether you think of science, whether you think of psychology, whether you think of culture, whether you think of sociology, no matter what area of thought that you can think of, all of it has its basis in the first few chapters of Genesis. And that's one of the main things that I'm going to try and develop in that next session. So it is the most important book. Now, you can view the structure of these first few chapters as we've had. Each of the days probably corresponds with chapter 1, verse 2, where it talks about the earth being formless and void. And if you remember way back, in fact, it was last year when we did the introductory session, I mentioned that the formless and void is not necessarily a negative connotation. That was one of the viewpoints. I took it in more of a neutral. In other words, these are the raw materials. This is the starting point. So the earth is formless and void. And then the first creative acts of the first 3 days deal with giving form, the separation of light from darkness, the sky and waters. The waters are separated, so there's a stretching of space, adding form. Day 3, plants and land masses. The land masses separating from the waters, and then plants are on day 3. And then the emptiness is filled in the last 3 days. We have the lights in the heavens. So the universe is filled with stars and probably planets and other lights. And the earth is filled with fowl and fish on day 5. That's the focus there. And then day 6 is the creation or the filling of the earth with animals and man. So that's just a kind of a quick view of the structure of the 6 creative days. Another quick review of what we've looked at in the first 5 days, obviously the creation of light in day 1, and several of the implications. These are the big implications, and each one of these are huge in terms of our thinking. In fact, we want to develop a biblical worldview. And these are elements of that biblical worldview. It's in stark contrast with the culture in which we live in. In fact, you could divide all other biblical thought, all other biblical views, all other religious systems into two parts. One is one that sees a continuity between the creation and a God. I don't want to say creator, but a God. Whereas the Bible, from the very initial verse, makes it clear that there's a distinction between God and everything else. So God is there in the beginning, and then God creates everything else. And this is a very important concept. This divides everything, every thought, in contrast to the biblical worldview, in contrast to the viewpoint of our culture. So this creator-creation distinction is very important to keep in mind. Also, it speaks of God speaking things into existence. I made a big point of that. And we see that over in every one of the creative days. In fact, in some of the creative days, we have it 2 times. And God said. So it's emphasized to make sure we don't miss the point that the creation is as a result of not evolution, not natural processes, but in fact God speaking things into existence. So that was the focus of day 1. And there were other implications that we drew, but those were the 2 main ones. On day 2, the waters are separated, and we have the stretching out of space like a fabric. And you've heard Russ Humphreys describe some of the scientific implications there. Day 3, we have land masses and the origin of life. Life doesn't originate in the oceans like evolution tells us. In fact, throughout the creative days, we have stark contrast and stark inconsistencies with man's theories and man's ideas, and particularly the theory of evolution. So there's no way that we can combine those 2 thoughts into what's commonly referred to as theistic evolution. And we've discussed some of those issues as well. So the origin of life with distinct kinds. The word kinds occurs 10 times in chapter 1, emphasizing the distinction, not the continuity of animal life, but the distinction of kinds. Not species, but kinds. And we made that point on day 3. On day 4, we have a major contradiction with a lot of believers that see, or to try to combine modern science with the biblical account. It's totally inconsistent. And this is a major contention because the heavenly bodies are created after life, after the earth, after planets, after light. Totally inconsistent. Not till day 4. So it refutes progressive creationism. And I spent a lot of time dealing with what progressive creationism is all about and how this contradicts it. On day 6, we have also day 4 rather, another implication. The priority of planet Earth is emphasized. Everything's going on planet Earth. You could even say that from the beginning of day 1. All of the work is on planet Earth. And the reason we stress that on day 4, if you look at the text, it talks about God creating the greater light and then the lesser light. And then almost as a side light, almost as, oh, by the way, He also created the planets. So if you think of the vastness of the universe, they're almost kind of a second thought or a side thought in comparison to what God is dealing with on planet Earth. So He prioritizes the work on Earth. A huge implication, obviously, again, contradicting the thinking of our culture. Then day 5, we looked at the creation of flying creatures and water creatures. Again, total inconsistency with evolution, and we kind of stressed that. So it refutes evolutionary theory in all of its forms. And in fact, all 5 days do, but we brought it to somewhat of a climax on day 5. So now we'll look at day 6. And in day 6, you can divide it into 2 parts, and this is on the outline sheet that is handed out, this outline. 2 parts, the creation of land animals. That's chapter 1, verse 24 and 25. Then the second part, which we'll get to in a moment. In fact, I'm not going to spend too much time on that this part, because I want to get to verses 26 and 27. which deals with the creation of man. And we'll spend considerable time looking at man created in the image of God. There are several very significant implications of that concept. So that's what we'll be dealing with. Now, I stress this in the outline, and God said, beginning in verse 24. You see that consistently throughout the creative days. You see it 2 times on day 6, 2 times on another occasion in another of the days. It's not just a simple phrase to just go over quickly. I've stressed this over and over. So again, we have emphasis on God speaking His creation into being. And this is reiterated elsewhere. It's not just Genesis. So when God creates, He doesn't use any means. He doesn't use naturalism in any way. He speaks things into creation or into existence. And that's the stress of these passages. So this verse begins in that way. And then he articulates that word, or what he said is articulated in some detail. And in verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures. Another creative fiat, this time addressed to the earth. Now, this doesn't imply that the earth brings it about. It responds to the Word of God as God creatively speaks. So the earth is to bring forth, in the verse, living creatures after, notice again, after their kind. Now, we saw that phrase in terms of the plants. We saw that in terms of the birds and the sea creatures. And now again, an emphasis, I mentioned 10 times in all in Genesis chapter 1, emphasizing distinctions between the different kinds. So God creates according to the kinds. And then we have 3 basic categories. The word behemah in the Hebrew is translated cattle. That's probably too restrictive a translation. It's not inadequate because I think it deals with those types of animals, in other words, domesticated type animals, but it's broader than the sense in which we think of cattle. It would include oxen, it would include sheep, it would include goats. Those animals, and by the way, these are not biological categories that we have in this description. The 3 categories are more related to man and their relationship to man and our activity. So I think he's dealing with those animals that are probably in closer proximity to man, that man uses, not only for food ultimately after the flood, but also in terms of food products. So it includes domesticated animals. So these are the classifications. They're not biological, not by phyla, order, etc., but according to 3 broad categories of different specific kinds. And the kinds are not specific species either. We mentioned that when we talked about that in the other days. So these are probably domesticated animals that are in view here. And then the second thing that is noted in the verse, creeping things. Very similar. It's a different word, but it's a similar word that was described dealing with water creatures. But now I think these are land-associated creatures. And you can have a broad spectrum in there, all the way from possibly insects, all the way to larger animals.